So if you perceive, for example, you perceive a phenomenon that actually has forms, such as a deer. It's just a deer. When you perceive a deer, there's actually, if you're saying that the deer, the forms of the deer, they're there from the side of the object in the sense that previously Geshe-la said that the horns of the rabbit, they're not there from the side of the rabbit, but they're there from the side of the consciousness. But that seems to imply that phenomena do not exist from the side of the mind, because in the first case, in the case of the deer, the actual horns seem to be there from the side of the object and really not from the side of the consciousness. Only in the second case, in the case of the rabbit, there's definitely the idea that yes, you cannot find any horns from the side of the rabbit, so therefore they're just there from the point of view of the mistaken consciousness. They're just a mere appearance from the point of view of the mistaken consciousness. And likewise, when she said that in terms of other characteristics that an object has, being nice or not nice, being impermanent or not impermanent, certain characteristics, again, does not have to look at the object itself, does not have to look at these characteristics coming from the side of the object and not from the side of the conceptual mind. So this question is therefore, how do you kind of explain that? You do still explain it from the side of the object, but there's no contradiction to this.
The tendere karasure toboje la ngobodi tile yogo emido aje tene ari tenchore dili tenchore nyema kaji tenchore maumba tengre die togo tentire ti gegdo ine migi toyala ari tongomida nyema dosajo zu tongomida maumba tongomida 공모부직 하게 주 남아 때 붙이고도 디지도 전에 아니 다 분부도 세야자보다 답변은 아니 가장 하게 다 컨버션하다 아니 분부미기 통 디지주다 단다 징그러 가장 컨버트의 분부도 어디 쟁비 떠버디기 아니 밀로레스 다단다디 도대베 시다 밀로레 인단 크기 분부도 라바는 신 하게 분부 유번 첫 튕해지 다다 요레스 이내 디 밀루어 인버디 제시파 자운데 그 거다 슈세디 가장이 미시디로 쉬대요 아니 미시디 파긴모도 원에디 메나 아니 미시게 요말 제상 안 떠버디 밀루어레스 도치네 과랑기 무슨로 거다 쉬 무슨디 맞출로체 어두치니 아니 엔티티 자와 다데바이
So when we talk about conceptual consciousness, well, a conceptual consciousness can take to mind all sorts of things. Usually, our eye consciousness, for example, our brain perceivers, so the conceptual consciousness can take to mind America, it can take to mind Delhi, it can take to mind the past, it can take to mind the future. But our eye consciousness, our sense consciousness, they cannot do that. They cannot see when we're in this place, they cannot see America, they cannot see the past, they cannot see the future. So the object has to be right there, it has to be accessible in order for a sense consciousness to be able to perceive it. Likewise, if we were to, if we have seen yesterday a vase in another room, and we're here right now, we can now, with a conceptual mind, that is with a memory consciousness, we can perceive this pot, we can remember seeing this pot. So that conceptual mind is non-deceptive. It is a non-deceptive mind. It can know the pot in the other room. But whether that mind is non-deceptive or not, it goes down to the eye consciousness that previously perceived the vase, perceived the pot. So whether there's really a vase or not, whether the memory consciousness is a correct consciousness, is non-deceptive, in other words, non-mistaken with regard to the vase, in the sense that it realizes it the way it exists, we have to check whether the eye consciousness that previously perceived it was non-mistaken with regard to perceiving the vase.
다 되네 센zambal레 다 도범이 루어디 무슨로 거다시 이네 무슨디 오버들로 고다시에 요말 배치리 된 요말이스 레고 딜레디 딱 무슨 거래 취재다 안 취재지기 취재로 고다시면 kalli khawchaarta kesu shingi ya kesu shingi chilo godashi la tiregimido ta diladu sane ta mishi khore tushi ina ane mishi ta chema khandi shagre sidi ane mishi di chilone kingi wong ma yin bachi bacha sebi to gitu bare laro chisa ta bacha de tempo yima ni yores bacha tempo sene ke shagyu mishi di chema res bacha tempo ma yin bachi chegi tuji ile 답변을 가려고 그랬다. 집에 나와 있나? 안 동서로 동걸 봐. 그래서 책이 추주지 레비. 아니 딘디디 아니 참아샤고 말했어. 책이 추주만 임바지. 바체 템포지는 용교디 참아레스. 에 딘디기 돈을 기버체.
So this previous explanation, that was from the tantric school, that when you have a conceptual mind, you can check whether it's authentic or not by going back to the eye consciousness, for example, that it's used the mind, because that is a non-mistaken mind. That's from the point of view of the Tantrika, or the Sutra school. Now, from the point of view of the Old school, the Chittamatra school, now when you perceive, for example, as an object with your eye consciousness, that is a mistaken consciousness, because the object appears to be externally existent, whereas in reality it doesn't exist externally. So your eye consciousness is therefore mistaken. Therefore, it's much more difficult to then say that the conceptual, the memory consciousness that is produced by that eye consciousness, whether that is mistaken with regard to its object or not. Does it actually, if you perceive, for example, a vase with the memory consciousness, well, was there actually a vase or not? Then you will trace it back to your eye consciousness that perceived the vase. But if that is mistaken because of the appearance of external existence, then you don't really have a reliable source. You cannot really establish that the meta mind, the memory consciousness, is not mistaken because the former mind is not mistaken in terms of the appearance of vase. You need to then go back to another mind to prove that it's not mistaken with regard to the vase, but that mind itself is also mistaken. It's difficult. So the mind-only school, therefore, to say that this eye consciousness is, though it's mistaken with regard to the appearance of external existence, it's not mistaken with regard to the vase. How do you establish that? Because there are different types of imprints that give rise to the appearance of the vase. So there's a kind of stable kind of imprint that leads to the appearance of something that does exist, that is established to be existent, whereas then there are imprints that are responsible for a mistaken appearance. So, for example, having the appearance of jaundice-like kind of phenomena appearing as yellow, even though in reality they are not. So there are two types of imprints that you prescribe in the Chittamatra system, which give rise to a mind being a correct mind or a wrong mind.
다 텐주를 기지시 온디 되게래 디파게 초칭이 나와이나 아니 저보라 파게 무비네스를 매반나신 샤와게 라조디에 무비네스를 요마로 데르도 유익한 기지시에 매den가지 유익문에
So now going back to the Prasangita school, Prasangita school, now in one case you have an awareness that perceives the horns of the rabbit. In the second case you have an awareness that perceives the object. But in both cases the objects do not exist from the side of the object.
안치당 기지시에이나 단다디 센센베기 다 강다강나와 탐지 바제세도 유튜버레스 디게제디 시온디 디기시 따와디 따다지 샤투가 있나 렌제 라 이치데 편도시부요레스 디치디 이만디 겐도산 교수라기 숨겨요 디 센센베 따와디기 톤에 렌제리 이치니에 편도도스 디지디즈는 게 간주시요레 딘디에는 이내 센센베 따와디 뇌내시르기 민도아스 요 개된 딜레존에 렌제리 이치니에 이치디 갈라오르다 양다부 차그면 도아스 디시디즈는 탄주율에 바제스도 유튜브 샤고로 와스 이송거다 다 디지디즈는 아니 초진의 딜에 아니 초진의 tum모임이 남차세에도서 kelе 호지기로 탄주하기 디지찬의 신에 바제스도 유튜브 샤고면 지지래 안 초진의 단다 공부류주기 디어를 땡질기 절바치 땡지나 중인 절바치 디나로라 마치 비지체온도 아니 사 가사 토마베바니 기회 바차기 왕기 사드 밀어서 봐 나와 세요. 아니 딘도로 나와스. 제시장에 딘디 껴샤. 뒤zul에 따나 바제스도 유튜브 샤베스도 비시래. 다 아니 tenjuele bajesedo tu tata shatuna ani moyeni bajesedo tu ni kiche di moyeni chi tata moyeni siro ta pake keme ba shatuna ani digane lenje di chinye ba ina pida bu shu changdo ta 강에 가르치고 그랬으나 tenjuele bu 미긴 있으면 tadi pake subtu에 주는 매 그래서는 우마주고 호랑나 우마주보도 우마주베기 rante나 뭐라 pake 뭐부터 뭐 순년다 소바 초다 되는세 순년이 니 순년이 미시기 미긴 송셔 실내도 다 초진이 미긴 나 초진이 바제세도 둘래도 디 켈레마 투레지 제선 디 마신네 아 정말 나자 정말 나자 시험이 바제세도 좀 기체지고 내주도
So from the point of view of the Chittamatra school, we must say that all phenomena, when they appear through the power of the ripening of imprints. So the only reason they appear to the sense consciousness is simple is because of the appearance, because of the ripening of imprints. So therefore, it's very effective to this kind of view, this kind of understanding, even though it's not according to reality because it's the Chittamatra explanation here, but nonetheless it's great for the generation of faith, towards faith in karma, in the working of karma, because an imprint derives from a certain effect. So this is also what the late director of the IBD, Yonezo Yatsu, has said when he taught before the teaching tradition, when he taught him that this gives rise, this understanding of the Chittamatra school can help a person to have greater faith in the law of karma. Then Geshe asked, well, that's not very that reliable because isn't there a problem in this system is being refuted? So you're generating great faith because of an explanation that is then in the end refuted. So your source, the source that you depend your faith on, that you base your faith on, that source is eventually refuted. And so Geshe said that actually from the point of view of the consequential school, there's also the explanation. You have to have the explanation of phenomena appearing because of the ripening of imprints. Why? Because there's the explanation of a unique appearance, an uncommon appearance, which appears to oneself and not to no one else. So also Nagarjuna here proposed a commentary on the common arising, and in this commentary he also said that the appearances to celestial beings and human beings are there because of the imprints that have been accumulated since the beginning of time. So he seems to be saying that the phenomena do appear due to the ripening of imprints. So therefore, then you base the explanation of cause and effect, the presentation of the law of cause and effect, based on that system, that is much more reliable because that is the system that you actually do not refute. This is the system which is accepted. But of course, they might say, then on the other hand, there's a problem again because when we say that a vase, for example, serves as the observed object condition, so it's an external condition which then gives rise to the appearance to an eye consciousness. So this is explained, for example, in the supplementary of the middle way by Chandrakirti and his other commentary, where he says that therefore, for example, the reflection of the face in a mirror and so forth, this serves as the observed object condition, which then gives rise to a sense consciousness that precedes it.
네 조지디 미다바레 세야도 치주디게디 로라 레샤바디 차레라부도 아니 파게 수진코랑 오코랑 차카부도 시디 지체나 오코랑 차레라와요레 니체나 에나 조지이나 조지 차히 가장 쉬워는 강관이 반대치 엔텔레 로스도에 시디 레라부 차기도 다딜레도 지시도 차시 유비 버도 콜레샤바 상단에 레라부요 다 차로 치니 차균이 맹행지 차바이나 아니 딜레 샤바레라도 다디 라투에 요마로 지지도 다디 균레 마샤바타고 차고 다 기제시에발라 딘지 참에도 요마레스 다 기지도 시에로 센스마 인지 딘지기 둘진 차로 치는 타를 아니 중쇼디 아니 참에 말에 뒤에 차지레스 네다 센스마 인지시 또 대바단다 지라마와다 권한적이 딘지기 뒤차쇼디 참에레 딜로던 제로 주는 말에 재산 안 되는데 뭐 원해디 이디르다 이든지 둘린 차네.
So then we got to the table, when we talk about the different characteristics of a table. Well, actually, with regard to the table itself, it seems easier to say that the table only exists from the side of the mind, whereas its impermanence, that is much more difficult to establish. So, for example, the table itself is made of different parts, and so when you look for the table, there's really no table that you can find as such. So therefore, from that point of view, all the different parts and so forth, that therefore the table actually just exists from the side of the mind, knowing it such. That is much easier to understand than looking at the impermanence. It's changing moment by moment, changing moment by moment, going deeper, going onto a very subtle level of, like a level of subtlest particles, very subtle particles. So from that point of view, then again, to think that these exist from the side of the mind is really very difficult. And so therefore, in some of the low schools, such as the Vaibhashika and the Chittamatra school and upwards, they do not accept that they're partless particles. They do not accept the existence of partless particles. But then the followers of the Vaibhashika and the Tantrika, they posit partless particles, and they say that the ultimate truth, the object that really exists from its own side, the ultimate truth is the partless particles, because not dependent on anything, not dependent on awareness, etc. So therefore, this kind of explanation, if you go on to a subjective level, it's much more difficult to understand that these type of characteristics are established on the side of the mind and not on the side of the object. 这个存在是跟心有关系，在他们的看法里面，这就是所谓的胜利地。那就了解。再来一个。
Yes. So earlier it was said that the understanding that the self does not really exist will, for example, lessen our anger towards other people, as we understand that the object of the anger does not really exist. Now, I'm pondering that, for example, the understanding of the emptiness of, say, an apple doesn't affect my appetite to the apple at all, nor does the understanding that, say, a poison doesn't really exist but is only posited by the conceptual mind does not really affect the aversion to the poison. So my question is, why would the understanding that the self of the other one doesn't really exist, why would this have anything whatsoever to do with our anger towards the person?
pena khansa gi tame chi go tsuna ta chi so gi dame chando ma se khansa shen gi tena khondu sa gi khansa gi dame ba ha ko de la tene ane khondu di chundu du des khondu di ma chi ma chundu des di khora os ta ji os sebu da os ji cha yo de ina ya tanda ji goma tse di karsna pena kushu da os na kushu da 좋아야 보이는 지내가 신부지나 되게 좋아데 가게 유기 논이 다시 꾸셔기 매바 있나요? 좋아되게 로비다가 용토를 했어. 안에 대상도 마세요. 배나 툭다오이나 툭디 막아야 돼. 툭디 코라 랑기 원데 툭 마이나야. 막아야 돼. 라자 돼. 다 근전 디체메 칼로다 한다 디니다 데다 중바다고 다나다지 모두디만 총 줘야 돼. 카레스 기대 봐주들라 호슈기 좋아하는 줄 아마 줘야지라 안에 지 두기 지 마가디야 지 용도 마 좋아이나 안에 당이 콘도 사사기 칸사티기 콘도 되면 총도에 굉장히 많아.
다디 그런게 있다 구슈기로 신부들이나 다 신부기 제디시나 다디라 저기 민다나 다 되살라 쇼르와 되샤충 다 저거도 기지 시초로 왔다. 다 두고 기지 시나는 마카와도 충으로 저거도 기지 시초로 와. 딜레도 전에 아니 하게 가르스고래 제나 민예버디다 섬로 원에 걸어 왔다. 강사나 신신 구슈도 된데 신부디에 제나 민예버. 아니 하게 두디에 제나 민예버디 섬로 원에 걸어. 양 참참에 파줘도 주죠 추 kushu khorang shimbu re maresini mares lani samlo khorne sujune ro nyoe jora dile samlo chochi di dang zo samlo di yawa che ma to bache de che yan dile rangja de ding chi dile di susui jeshi gi nyong de bi da jeshi khore 용계 관한기 친구도 있어봐 대화초 동네서 뒤에 째는 매봐 뒤에 섬을 걸어 이 섬은 원에 걸어요나 한 되게 공존의 신진이 총을 줘 공연지지래 이제 총을 줘라도 다 아니 도진비 진보도 총을 준 당아도 동의 이게 요 말이 근데 제거에 요 말. 그 그거 김생기 토네 디사는 여기 요 인자 하게 아니 돌고야지 이내 되게 아니 째는 얘기면도 코랑고에 두레민도 세상도 원에 걸어이나 자식 곁한번 먹어야지 나 그래 아니 경쟁 대비 턴에 먹어야지 로 양다래 디 라고에 개요만 디 라와이나 사이니 거여로 두 제선다 하게 디마인 버지 랑무의 유버 진비 턴에 먹어야지 나 그래 디 라와이나 아니 타지도 먹어야 멤버체 두여나 야 두디기 미신다는 팽겨로 콜 팽미차 요로 아니 딜을 비슷하게 섬로도 거두고로 디메나 아니 거두그래 남치리 타지도 막아오진 남사 유액이 섬로디마도 된징이 장샤유 섬로디 어딘지죠 남사 거유 세야지 신부도 라디 남사 레 세야지 답하게 코랑기 외에 신부에 매 코랑기 외에 두에 많이 라디 아니 신의 셈디 리버디 비슷한 처지 디 외에서 편도치와도 충어도 차상하지 비슷 제투게지 요하래서 됩니다.
Visualized response to your question is, well, here we think about the apple. When you say delicious apple, actually the idea over here is that you have desire for the apple that is delicious. And then there's dislike for poison, for a poisonous substance, because you're harmless with it, right? So visualize between that kind of perspective. Now, when you look at the apple from its own side, the taste, the deliciousness, when you search for this deliciousness, you cannot find it. So you search for such deliciousness, there's nothing to be found. Likewise with regard to the poison, you look for the poison from the side of the poison, again you cannot find that. And then if you look at the apple, there's actually two aspects to look at, and there's danger that you don't do that, that you neglect one aspect. Because when we talk about the deliciousness of the apple, there is the deliciousness that comes that we see as coming from the side of the apple, and there's the taste in your mouth, what your tongue consciousness experiences, that kind of taste. So sometimes when you investigate something, when you search for it, you cannot find it, you take it from the side of the apple, but you ignore the taste, even the taste in your own mouth. That, if you start searching for that, you cannot find it. You cannot find an actual taste or some intrinsic taste that when you search for it, that can be found. So that is not findable. So, of course, on the other hand, with regard to the poison, even though that can also not be found, because there's a necessity, there's a reason for why we don't take the poison. So that would be it's not advised that we say, oh, this is now you can take poison. No, because there's a reason, there's a necessity for why we can take it. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that you can find the poison, that there's really some non-likeness, like dislikeness from the side of the object, that it needs to be disliked just from the side of the object, because it doesn't exist as something harmful from the side of the object. Why? Because that poison that may harm you may potentially benefit another person. It could actually benefit another person. So if we perceive this poison as being poisonous from its own side, as being harmful from its own side, then because of the grasping onto the true existence of that object, we may throw away the poison, poison actually prevent it. And then likewise, with regard to with the delicious apple, then we get maybe like a very strong craving towards it. So here it's like, okay, there is this taste of deliciousness, etc., but it doesn't exist too much on the side. So the craving is reduced. That kind of dislike, that kind of possible hatred towards the taste, that is also reduced. So it's more of a balanced reaction towards the object.
디 고르슈 이제 용도 하고래 디 심해가 삼다에 디 젠 아니 얘기 믿으시는 심해가 삼다에 지 엔텐디 이미 좀 젠기 라심해가 삼다에 지 이네 젠이 얘기 매버디 내도 뭐 최비체라 엔텐디 이미 좀 젠기 라심해가 삼다나 라심해가 라마메가 세도 참어디 거 되지 엔 젠이 매버디 삼마다 뭐지 엔 시장 때네 여바 인자 아니 랑은이 요 말레스 카도 디체바 이나 아니 가시에다 참을 조시게 되지 가시라고 지금 참모가 냐마티 된지 요래 다 된지기 돈에 선을 담바이나 빼나 다 독신 다니잖아요 맞잖아요 간제 맞아 보이나 아무도 도그랬다 아무서나 나거래 도그랬다 디지디잖아요 딱고 랑긴 외네 내행지 내비다 두시제 보이나 아무도 이게 아무도 되는 다 육장체라 디간 되더라 랑긴 외네 말에 마다 뜨데 뇌게레스 계제디 셰바이나 랑외네 많이데바 이네 마다 뜨네 뇌기 계제디 셰바이나 마다 뜨네 뇌기 여인상 해사이마 이네 코랑 외네 두자스 파게 계자마 인상 콜러 셰벌로는 베 혼도사여서 디치마 요 코랑의 공연지는 콜러 뜨네 미카시르 뜨데 메 다디 와 마네오 마스 팽겨 펜세들 비치다다 당투고对你越别团呢，必须得大当土不多。然后我那个就希望的听这个那面里面的，白的，这是叫他们讲的怕有出有抗腾住的。
This will come later again, but another explanation that needs to still be given because it may come up. So in general, when we say something doesn't exist intrinsically, so when we search for it, we cannot find it. That understanding may be helpful for then understanding dependent arising. Sometimes if there's no sense how when something is searched for, it cannot be found as existing somewhere outside. If you right away go into dependent arising, the subtle level of dependent arising may not be understood. For some people, it may still be understood that even though they do not go into reflection upon how phenomena cannot be found and into analysis, nonetheless, if they go into they may want to be memorizing and still get an understanding of that. Anyway, then I'm saying that with respect to the dependent arising, so for example, a poisonous object, I'm not saying sweet food is poison to us. Why? Because it comes with any kind of sweet poison, sweet food is poison, but only poison dependent on him. It is poison dependent on him, not from the side of the object. It's not from the side of the object poison, because it depends on him in order to be poisoned. So therefore, if he really thought it was poisonous from its own side, he'd get upset with that kind of food and just throw it away. But understanding that it affects him, so therefore from his perspective, therefore it's not poison, that's why he's not upset with the food and throw it away. He may give it to someone else for whom that person is actually becomes medicine, possibly that kind of food can become medicine. So this kind of food is therefore he gives it to another person, so there's not that extreme reaction as in it's poisonous such and such. Rather understanding that independence on himself, on another object, therefore he can say it.
那可能在某些人来说，这个点他下一步会有帮助，我就可以把这个点给对。因此，当我了解到不是由他自己方面成立起来，而是公带的这两个观点都一起有的话，我就可以非常善加的运用这个东西，知道说他对谁是比较好。
미지기 소설을 내기에는
맞지. 내가 또발 차야기 강사 현다기 통보냐고. 근데 통보도 내가 또발 차야기. 내가 또발 차야기 강사 현다 통보냐고. 내 통보도 강사 현다기 통보. 강사 현대가 공부를 해서 알았어. 텐디부터 저는 그 강사 현대의 공부 있나니 내가 또 봐야나 근데 공부를 잡았다. 내가 또 보면 근데 공부를 잡았다. 근데
이길 거 됐어. 얘기 또 봐라 강사 현대의 공부 잘고 어려워. 수부 통과 잘고 어려웠다. 그 수부 그 센스. 뒤에는 그 규기 강사 현대의 규기 되고 레마레스. 강사 신이 규기 되고 아니 가수거리 이나 아니 얘기 똑같이 유나 거 요래 거면은 요말에서 지금 좋아서 딜레가 와
This question was when you see a person's aggregates, like a body aggregate, in the continuum of another person. So if he thinks there's a method, there's a concept of consciousness in his own continuum, thinking, oh, there's the body of another person. So then does the body of the other person only exist because he thinks there is a body of another person? So therefore does the existence of that body depend on his own conceptual consciousness? So in other words, there wouldn't be a body unless he was thinking there was a body of another person. So if there's no conceptual consciousness thinking there's a body of another person, therefore you do not have another person.
지선다디 되게 녀래 또버디 매네 그 요청은듯이 강사신 좀 책만 강사신 부모선 책만 강다 강이네 그 또버 매네 요딩이지 이네 또버 요나 요매나 메시디 디념 잡어든데 라이군다 근데 센점바이나 선생님이 제나 안 부모 요래 때다 디념도 선생님이 마제나 안 부모 요마리 라고 네 텐주에게 딘디랑 단 세부터 마서 또버디도 스케어는 유바 차도래 안 또버디 마제용도 메바 차도래 딘디 숨는다 딘디 마송나 이네 또버다 라레니 세부송으로 라레단 카르레 당은지 삼다고 해시라 딱이시 라마레바 원내이나 딘두래 그러기 시셔비와 흉내 시셔비 딘두들이 다디 요르다 텐주 지고 왔다
Response to this as well. Actually, we say that in order for something to exist, there has to be general conceptual consciousness. We never say that at the time when there is a concept, when there is a phenomenon, that at that time you also need a conceptual consciousness. So this is different from the Chittamatra school, which asserts, for example, that in order to have a vase, you must have a consciousness that perceives the vase. You must have the imprints frightening for the appearance of the vase and for the consciousness perceiving the vase. Here we're not holding that assertion. We're not saying that at the time when you have a conceptual consciousness, at the time when you have an object, you must at that time also have a conceptual consciousness. But still, objects do depend on conceptual consciousness. So this needs to be explained here. So we're not saying, if we were to say that phenomena do not depend on conceptual consciousness, then they would have to be existing truly. So Geshe is therefore saying, when we say that, well then, because the ego scope is mistaken and phenomena do exist.
他说他有时候依赖分离，但他没有明确说要。
So therefore we have to investigate what does it mean to be dependent on consciousness.
主题就变成如果
We need to investigate
那今
what
天
that
能够得到一个结论，就是不需要依赖分别性的话，那就是意识成立。那如果今天我们得到结论意识成立的话，那印象派已经说的就不对了。
개발 망보치기 빼지 숨고도 빼디기 토네다 망보치로 고도 죽으래 그시양 고도 대화 용식을 이 가리스모르스나 근데 홍기를 저도 아니 가와도 그지를 뚝다 빼고 두두자네 에셈나도 가르치는 것도 다 가와도 빼고 투송 전부 잠래 되는 민도스 그러 가와지 파기니 유 가지체 아니 신이 소소 좀 투송 삼 챙기도 왔어 다가는 문을 주로 찾수리했어. 제선 땅은 저기 아니 디크기 수보레스. 세네다 디미지도스. 나뒤산에 미지 코랑문이 유효하지. 신의 건지 카데니 유효버들라 유효버 문진 제제. 아니 미레스. 아니 생기 미도스. 진지지 다가는 문을 주로 찾수리했어. 근데 숨도
So actually, some scholars give an example of we have an example where they give an example in order to understand this idea better. So So some people may understand it better, some people may misunderstand it. But he's usually saying that when you walk through a dark room, for example, and you hit your head against a pillar. So actually, the moment you hit your head, in that then you hit your head. So it's not like there's a sense, even though you hit your head in that moment, there's a sense the pillar was there before, and now I hit my head, and then I'm thinking I hit my head. So there's the sense that phenomena are over there from their own side, they're there, and then after they're there, then I'm thinking, oh, they're there. So there's the sense that first they're there, and then I can think that they are there. So that is actually a sense of existence from his own side. The fact that we have a sense that something has to be there first, and then we can actually have the thought, oh, it is such and such. Without that, it's impossible. So that kind of sense, having that kind of sense illustrates that we think phenomena exist outside of oneself.
양이 좋으시대. 양이 좋으시대. 나한테 되게 가게 체디 제라. 나는 혼자를 두스트디. 나는 거 저지를 투송. 그래 예예버지를 투송 선택기도. 나디 템바디 문에를 선택기도 언제기. 다 이나 되게 되는 좀 소해야 돼. 당가 저지를 투송 뒤쪽지를 선택거라. 리처를 뒤. 리처를 따라라. 다 리처스디 파샤니 로드 차당다 딘디 차르기도 이네 차당디 파샤니 따다 디르모도 투메요 요거 디조지르베 야나 배워 신다지도 투데 신다를 큰 투요마 두세로 두시데 다 디르 투세디 디마데요 디조지르베 신다지도 투데 야 디에마이야 배워 투세 신다지도 근데 제가 주는 민도 제상 안에 디오 냠바 딜 라레바 대sam직마도 남샤 민도시오다.
So for example, Gema says, take the same example with the table. So you saw how Yana hit his forehead on the table. So you need to imagine it that way. So when you're walking in the dark and there's this table kind of upside down and you hit your head, well, you hit your head and you say, oh, there was a table and I hit my head on the table. But actually, as it says in the London channel, so there's a sense that there's really a table over there and I hit my head on the table. So but as it says in the London channel, with regard to the table, it is only there because it is posited by the mind. The mind has posited the existence of the table. So but it seems to us it is really there from the side of the object. So it seems to be from the side of the object, but in reality it is the mind that posits it as being a particular object such as the table. So when I hit my head, I'm thinking I hit my head on the table, but when you investigate, it was not a table, it was actually the piece of the table, the part of the table, the leg of the table, which is not the actual table. So therefore, what I actually hit my head against was not the table, it was something that is not the table. Or it must have been something other than any of these parts, which again cannot be found. So we have to think along those lines, that it's because I'm thinking I hit my head on the table, and therefore I did actually hit my head on the table. But when I investigate, what I found is not the table. What I've actually hit my head against is something that's not the table.
唯一于继此之心。
달러를 든지지 가와를 투송 마 투송 가와를 투송 든지기 러를 지처기 요 인상 러이 처수 디시송진이 타니지 다디 가와레 디마레 와콜 가와를 투송 든지기 남샤지 레버레 마도 러이 처수디 파샤나 남샤키니 민도스다 통행아 간디디 베게다 엔팅마르 마로 토에디마도 통다 엔티레 로스마 민도 아니 가와를 투송 투세디 딘지지 되었으면도 요마다 자견디 아니 딘지지니 제저나 가와 남샤민도 아니 통예민도 통예의 투세니가 면도 투가 요마레 제선다 르이처주디 파샤니 유르간다나 남샤크라민도스다
So Therefore, when I say I hit my head on a pillar, well, first of all, I hit my head on the pillar. When I investigate the pillar, when I actually hit my head against, I cannot find. When I take the self, again, I cannot find. So really, it is positive from the side of the object, from the side of the mind, sorry, it's positive through the power of the consciousness. Independent of the consciousness, when I hit my forehead, I said I was hit. Actually, what was really hit was the forehead. There's no I that can be found. That was hit. And when I hit my head at the if I hit the pillar, I didn't hit the entire pillar. I didn't hit anything that isn't actually the pillar. I hit just a small part of it. So really, it depends on the mind that thinks I hit my head. I hit my head on the pillar. So the pillar has been posited by the mind as that which hit my head. And I myself hitting the head, that is again is posited by the mind. Because without that mind thinking I hit my head on the pillar, if I left that aside, there wouldn't be a pillar, there wouldn't be a mind, there wouldn't be anything that was hit, and there wouldn't be anything that hit it. There would be no I that was hit, and there would be no pillar that was hit. And if that is not there, the hitting doesn't take place. There's no action of hitting because there's no object and there's no agent.
Jisnata tomana ralebi seegita kohadita unju ledi gora semnorola. Di lezan tiwadi ligora. Ta di kelen tuela ta seni ani mebadi. Kohazam katola mashabache. Onera mindu seegi tama chebadu ani rale seedi chizam trae ningado. Ta zena mindu seedi susi 타 쳐가지고 젠 아니 신에 다 라레 말라브랑다시 라레 라마투네다 말라브랑다시 차이르다 젠 민두 세데 타 쳐가지고 주나 제선 제고고도 세데 되다 가서네 디디시 샤지 제고고도 세 맞제나 아니 요만.
So when we say phenomena do not exist independent of conceptual consciousness, upon saying that, the question that was just posited, the question that was just asked, that kind of